Live Before Lock, one that will be covering the remaining MLB games on today, where they simply just keep coming one after another. So if you are a baseball fan, boy, it is a day for you here on this fine Memorial Day. But I am Chris Spags, joined by a man who is always with me on these deeper dives / afternoon MLB journeys. He's Terry McBride. How you doing, Terry?
Doing pretty well, my friends. It's been a good Memorial Day of baseball so far. Always a fun day of baseball, usually loaded up with afternoon games like we're seeing today. And it's interesting the way the slates are breaking down for us today. Gives us some interesting conversation about these last couple games. But hey, I owe you a congratulations, huh? I haven't talked to you since the other day, and nice little pop I heard about.
Yeah, unfortunately not in MLB, so I have earned no credibility in that space. But yeah, I did have that nice win over the weekend in NBA. So yeah, that is one. Well done, I'm sure I'll be talking. Eric will make me talk about it more in the tip-off coming up next on the channel, I'm sure. But yeah, very, very happy to hit that. And yeah, honestly, just as happy though, like the small victories. And Terry, I know you know how this goes too, like where you have the one win and then it sort of feels like, oh, you get that moment of feeling like you're on a heater and you don't know if it's actually that you are, or that you're just kind of running good. But I did give my home run pick for the early show of Austin Meadows, and then he did actually go off today. So that is one. Is Austin Meadows nice. A tip? Yeah. You know, okay, yeah. I was like, wait a minute, am I mixing up my hockey players and my baseball players? No, it was Meadows I picked today.
You're good.
And I saw our girl Heather actually did bet that. So first of all, I'm generally going to advocate you don't have to bet the things that I say on a show because there's a world of possibilities out there. But when you do bet it and you get it right, feel free to tweet me at Chris Spags to let me know. But I feel like, Terry, just anytime you're running good like that, I have to assume all my takes are going to be right, even though I would just tell everybody out there, just fade everything for me right now, because when it goes bad, it's going to go real bad.
That's it. And that's like, I always get that feeling like, oh man, I just hit. Now people are going to listen to something. And then it's like, I start to, maybe get a little shaky on the confidence, but hey, when you're hot, man. Sounds like you're rolling. So maybe I'll let you take over here and I'll just kind of kick back, listen to what you have to say about this upcoming slate. It's going to be a weird one in the night slate with all those pitchers available. You have 3 aces going on the night slate. Should be interesting.
Yeah, a lot stacking up here for the late slate and then this afternoon slate, which is going to be closing in about an hour most of the site. So that is why it's technically a Live Before Lock show. So help us out, guys. Hit that like button if you can. Also, make sure to check out the Top Pitchers tool. It is the free premium tool of the day. And also go check out all the tools that we have for Awesemo Plus at awesemo.com/join. We've got tools and content for nearly every DFS sport out there. And you get all of it for an Awesemo Plus weekly pass of $29.95. That includes full access to all the premium content and tools on awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, lineup builder, and much more stuff like the Top Stacks tool, Top Pitchers tool, Top Golfers tool, Top Fighters tool, the Boom Bust tool in the NBA. There's an individual tool for pretty much every sport out there, so you get that included as well. If you're only looking to play MLB DFS, and sign up for an Awesemo Plus MLB weekly package for just $15.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this afternoon slate first, Terry. And as you can see on the board here, we are going to do all the games coming up. So we'll cover the first 3 for the afternoon, then go into the night slate. And we'll do a little money time in between for the afternoon slate as well. But Angels, 3.6 implied runs against Johnny Cueto. Johnny Cueto on a main slate, like we talked about this morning with Greg and myself, maybe not a guy you're wanting to get to, especially with a little bit of ownership coming his way. On an afternoon slate, though, he's projected for 40% ownership. A guy with a 20% K rate on the year is facing an Angels team that strikes out a little bit above league average on the year, a 24.6% K rate for themselves against right-hand pitching. But Terry, Johnny Cueto, I feel like he's one of those guys that if you're going to get your exposure to him on this kind of slate where you only have 3 games is one where you can do it. I just feel like the 40% number, just a bit lofty for old Johnny Cueto.
Yeah, that starts to get a little bit uncomfortable when we're talking about anybody in baseball. And when we're talking about Johnny Cueto, man, maybe 6-7 years ago, Johnny Cueto, we could have gotten away with that. But this is a big ask, even against a depleted Angels lineup. Doesn't have Mike Trout in it. We know it doesn't have Shohei Ohtani in the projected. We don't have the confirmed lineup here. But what I'm looking at is not a very good lineup. But Cueto, like you say, he's 20.3% strikeout rate this year. Yeah, the xFIP is fine at 3.55. He's pitching okay in terms of real baseball, but there's just not a ton of MLB DFS upside here. It's 7,500. You're getting a fine price on him. It's just difficult to roster at that kind of ownership. If he was going off at even 20% ownership, 25 on a 3-game slate, it's a lot more reasonable. It's a lot easier to swallow. It's just difficult. I think you'd have to be there at least to some degree, but I'd be comfortably under that number. I think taking shots on this slate.
You're probably not many straight fades you're going to get because of the size of the slate and the fact that really it is a pretty flat slate overall. The Cueto to me, just, if I were at 20% Cueto, I'd feel pretty good about that. I feel like anything under the 40%, I'd feel a little more comfortable with. I just don't see this being a spot where he's going to mow guys down. He's pitching about 5 innings per start, about 86 pitches per appearance as well. So he's getting a decent amount of run, but the Angels,
Yeah, I think we kind of have to at least be open to the idea, right? I mean, we've got some good professional hitters still living in this lineup, and then there's a lot of cheap guys that you can get to. So if they're not getting extreme ownership because everybody's going to Cueto, then I think that makes some sense. Take out some shares against a pitcher that we know has been nowhere near the old version of himself. He's 35 now. He's had struggles over the last few years. This is a safe target for bats. So even with a depleted lineup, I'm not saying we want to roster, 35% Keen Wong shares. I have no idea who he even is, but I think it's a spot where the known commodities, the Anthony Rendons, Justin Uptons, Jared Walshes of the world, even a Juan Lagares, you can get a little bit of upside out of. Kurt Suzuki could give you a little sneaky power, even though he's got no hit tool really to speak of. So I think building with some of those guys is certainly fine. And if you're getting leverage on it, then yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting spot there.
Yeah, I agree with you. Rendon and Walsh are the ones that really jump out. I would also say Taylor Ward, somebody who I wouldn't mind here, who's been 98 WRC plus guy since 2019 against right-hand pitching, so around average there, but a 178 ISO. I think he could have some pop here in a price tag that's not too onerous to get to, but yeah, it's not a good lineup, but there are a few good hitters here, and I do think Cueto on the other side certainly gonna, if he can get through Rendon and Walsh, maybe he survives and does have a decent day, but I don't mind playing the other alternative here just because you kind of have to on a slate of this size. On the other side, we have Dylan Bundy going against San Francisco, 4.4 implied runs for the Giants now. Bundy on the year been kind of unimpressive, holding flat at a 24.1% K rate. That's in line with a sample size since 2019, a 24.2% K rate. Did show some improved signs last year, but isn't really panning them out so far this year, Terry, where the swing and strike rate's been down a little bit. Chase rate, I guess, pretty much flat up a little bit on paper, but still Bundy in this spot going against a Giants team that does strike out at a 27.8% clip on the year against right-hand pitching. I think Bundy is for the main slate, I talked about him being a volatility spot that I don't mind targeting because I think Bundy has some potential. The Giants have some potential. On the shorter slate, obviously, it's going to be a lot higher ownership, but I still feel the same way. To me, Bundy, 33% ownership. Giants also going to be owned. Can't really argue either side because I think there is a high potential for either part of the equation here to be in that winning lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen, Bundy's struggling a little bit this year. I was looking into what might have changed about his pitch mix, see if I could identify anything. The one thing I really noticed is his fastball, his velocity is up a little bit on his slider. And it's up a little bit on his fastball as well, but it kind of shrunk the differential in velocity between his slider and his fastball. And he's throwing his slider with a lot more spin on it than his already impressive 2,538 spin rate from last year. He's up to 2,710, which is a ton of spin. Normally something we like to see, normally makes a breaking pitch even more effective. I just feel like maybe he doesn't have the feel for the pitch yet. And it's kind of, speculation, but just looking at it, it's getting 403 expected slugging percentage against the pitch this year so far. It was at 199 last year. He was inducing 50% swing and miss with the pitch last year. He's only at 40.7% this year. So guys are just making contact with his primary out pitch a little bit more than they had been. So I think that's contributing to some of what we're seeing in terms of the xFIP being up a little bit, the whip being up a little bit, guys getting on base against him. The strikeouts are still there. So I think there's definitely upside. And then we see this Giants team, they're having odd struggles for them against right-handed pitching this year, 27.8% strikeout rate as a team this year. So they're down from, they're normally a very good team at avoiding the strikeouts, creating runs 2% less than average. They're still hitting for a little bit of power. 177 team ISO is one of the better ones in the league. 50 home runs in the split, also among the league leaders. So it is, like you said, kind of an interesting spot where I could argue it on both sides. And I think that's kind of how I would approach it. I would have shares of San Francisco, and I would probably have shares of Bundy as well on a 3-gamer.
Yep. So that's definitely the way that I think we're on the same page with that one. And the Giants hitters, it does look like good amount of ownership going to guys like Mike Yastrzemski, Buster Posey. Lamonte Wade was not the most recent run of ownership that I saw, but he's in the leadoff spot. Actually, what's Wade's price tag today would be the question, because I don't have that in front of me. 2,800 in the leadoff spot. So Wade, wouldn't surprise me if Wade got the same amount of ownership then as Yastrzemski and Posey, because that makes the stack cheaper as well. I guess the question, Terry, is with these guys then being 20 to 25% owned as Giants bats, Brandon Crawford also going to be pretty highly owned as well, hitting in the 6 hole. Are you like, what's the number for you on a short slate? Because it is a shorter slate. There's potential here. There's a volatility as well. And I think to me, like 25% still feels a bit lofty, but I'd be happy getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20%.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be about right. And it's more about, how much we're getting to the stack and then trying to distribute some of that ownership within. So I just like to try and get combinations of at least a couple of the lower owned guys. I don't actually have the afternoon ownership populated in my spreadsheet here, so I'm just trying to look through it on the site. And I'm not doing that great a job of getting through it, but that's kind of, here we go. I got it sorted to the team now. So looking at the DK ownership, like I would have no problem getting to a bunch of shares of like Evan Longoria in there, Wilmer Flores, these guys that are projected for lower ownership than some of the other hitters. And I'm just looking, it doesn't look like Flores is in the confirmed lineup. So excuse me on that one, but Evan Longoria looks like he's picking up a reasonable share at 11% ownership. So I'd be fine attacking something like that with a professional hitter who I really trust over the years and who's out to an okay start in terms of where we would normally expect his hit tool to be, but the power is there. He's got a 219 ISO on the year, creating runs 31% better than average. I would expect better than a 265 average out of him, but I think that's fine. That's something that's going to come around. So that's a good spot to attack for me. And I would use hitters like him to kind of weave it together, stitch together the ownership. Because the Yazes, the Posies, and the Crawfords of the world are pretty highly owned here.
All right, next game up, we got Boston getting 4.4 implied runs against Jose Urquidy. And again, guys, we're going to cover the afternoon slate first. In the back half of the show, we'll talk about the night slate as best we can with no lineups out for that one. So make sure you're hitting that like button here to help us out a bunch here. It is the weekend. We're all here, a holiday weekend, rather. We all are here grinding here on Memorial Day. So help us out here. Show a little extra love today if you can, because it is a tough sledding today with the holiday going on. We got Boston, though, 4.4 implied runs against Jose Urquidy. Urquidy's strikeouts have been down on the year, down to an 18.6% rate. Since 2019, it's 19.6% strikeout rate. That's also still significantly under league average. He does not give up a lot of walks and hits, though. Only a 1.03 whip on this year, a 1.05 whip since 2019. XFIP, though, shows maybe there could be some bad things to come. 4.6 XFIP for him. But still, Urquidy, just the pitcher, not the sexiest, not the most interesting. And I think, too, in terms of strikeouts, not a guy who's getting enough strikeouts to feel the most comfortable. There he's pitching about 5.5 innings per appearance and 86 pitches per appearance as well. So he's getting into games deep enough here that I feel like you can't take him out of the player pool. But going against Boston, like, this is one of those matchups where I don't have a lot of faith in Urquidy, and I really think that he's okay enough too that I think Boston becomes a little bit less appealing.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we're going to have to take out shares of Red Sox bats to a certain degree, I think, just because of the general upside of those hitters and short slate. But yeah, I agree. He kind of is in a spot where he might cap their total upside a little bit, just in terms of what he does with hard hit rate allowed. He's sitting in the 86th percentile of hard hit rate so far, 53rd of barrel rate, and 56th of average exit velo allowed. So guys, when they do hit it hard, are able to get the good part of the bat on the ball and get decent exit velocity against him, but he's been able to limit the hard hit. I would love to see this kid with more strikeouts, because that would be a nice combination of stuff there. Only inducing 9.5% swinging strikes, which is right on where he's been, in terms of minor leagues, in terms of last year. So I think that's basically who he is. I don't know that we're going to see much more enhancement of strikeouts from him. So you're throwing a pitcher into a guy who's, I don't want to describe him as a contact pitcher, but not a big time strikeout guy, up against a Red Sox lineup that, when they do make contact, drives the ball pretty well. Bunch of power hitters through the middle of this lineup. So I'd be skeptical about rostering too much Urquidy here, given that we're not getting a strikeout upside out of him, and he is going up against a good lineup, even if he is potentially going to hold it down a little bit.
Yep, I would agree. And let's talk about that Boston lineup too, because you have a lot of ownership expect to be going to JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts now. These guys for the main slate, we're looking under-owned. On this slate, there are guys who are going to have some of the biggest upside you'll find in the slate, as Terry was hinting at there. Rafael Devers is going to be a lesser-owned part of that grouping. So if you are taking an expensive Boston stack, that is one guy to make sure to try to include, I guess, if you are trying to get that ownership product down. But this Boston team, Urquidy, I think, can oppress them a little bit, but you still have to be getting some exposure. To me, though, the issue is really that these guys are all going to be upwards of 20% ownership for most of the stack, and then as high as 28% for Martinez, as I mentioned, 32% for Bogaerts. I feel like getting to Boston, Terry, you just have to get him less in the field, because I don't know how you can get above the field and feel comfortable with it, given what we talked about with Urquidy.
Yeah, I could justify going down to like a Hunter Renfroe down the bottom of the lineup at 12.1% in the afternoon projection of ownership, and you gain a little bit of advantage there. But the only really truly low owned hitter in the lineup is Marwin Gonzalez, who I just do not like rostering. He's below the Mendoza line, 199, 292, 284 hitter this year, 0.085 ISO, 1 home run in his 161 plate appearances. There's just nothing left for Marwin. So even though he costs almost the minimum, even though nobody's going to be there and he helps you offset stuff, I just don't trust it. You can roster a Danny Santana, but Danny Santana is going off at 20% ownership in the middle of this lineup, so that's not helping you very much. I'd like to pay up to get different with Devers, but then you're still walking into 18% ownership. Like, it makes sense to roster the stars because they're getting less ownership a little bit than some of the, I guess that's not exactly the right way to say that. It makes sense to pay up to go to Devers and Verdugo because they're getting less ownership than some of the value guys, while Martinez and Bogarts, the 2 stars, are drawing a lot of ownership. So that's kind of how I would approach this stack, would be to grab the 2 highly owned stars anyway, and then just play the guys that you're paying up to put with them. They're the guys that correlate well with them in the lineup anyway. And then you can mix Enrique Hernandez in, you can mix Danny Santana in, and maybe some Christian Vasquez.
On the other side, we have Eduardo Rodriguez going against Houston, 4.6 implied runs for the Astros in this spot. And Rodriguez on the year getting some decent strikeout results, the 26.2% K rate. That does seem a little bit unsustainable given the fact he's getting less swinging strikes, and his velocity is down as well. 11.5% swing strike rate since 2019. Just a 10.3% swing strike rate this year. But it does seem like for Rodriguez, he's going to be owned a lot. And this is one spot to me that I know we're sort of nickel and diming a lot of these pitchers, but like I would take Urquidy over Rodriguez, I think, because of the fact that Rodriguez is going to be so highly owned. He's facing a team in Houston that doesn't strike out very much at all. 17.2% K rate on the year against left-hand pitching. This particular lineup for them today, a 20% K rate, so a little bit better, but still, not quite league average even in terms of those strikeouts. I just don't see the upside for Rodriguez in this situation. I guess maybe he can sort of hang in long enough and be useful, Terry, but I think he gets BABIP to death in this game, and I just don't see this particular play being worth almost 40% ownership on DK.
Yeah, I share a season-long team with a couple of buddies in one of my leagues that I'm in, and we had a question this morning about whether we wanted to start Herman Marquez at home for 2 against Texas and whoever they're playing later in the week, or we wanted to start Rodriguez in this spot. And I firmly wanted to start Marquez at Coors Field because I do not like to pitch lefties against this Houston Astros team. Tough spot, 17.1% strikeout rate, best in baseball, 25 home runs, tied for the best in baseball in the split, 100 creating runs, 23% better than average in the split. It's just a team loaded with guys that hit left-handed pitching very well, and they're a bunch of solid professional hitters. I would much rather roster some Astros bats. Now, this active lineup is not the best version of the Astros lineup, I will say that, but still, you've got Altuve in here, Bregman, Correa. Kyle Tucker struggles a little bit against lefties, but I still like the quality there. Lemus Diaz is a decent stick. There are some solid bats in there that I still am worried about. I think there's more upside than we would initially see for Rodriguez going up against the standard Astros lineup, but I still worry about the spot here, particularly if he's getting a lot of ownership on him. I don't have the ownership number in front of me, but that was a spot I was already planning on getting below the field on. So yeah, I would still head that way.
It looks like it's about 38% projected ownership for Rodriguez. And we will do a little run on money time here to give you the top 5 plays on Draftkings at FanDuel coming up in 10 minutes. But I would say for Rodriguez, does look very highly owned. Also giving up a 290 batting average on the year. Like all these things to me just grade out really poorly against Houston, given the fact that they're not going to strike out. And I'll make that easy on him. But the Houston bats on the other side do seem appropriately owned for the most part, at least for the big names. Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, Carlos Correa, those guys will be decently owned. Chas McCormick in the 2-hole also going to pick up a little bit of ownership, though about half of the star players for Houston, it looks like. And McCormick has been mediocre overall against left-hand pitching, a 53 WRC plus, so he's not creating those runs that well, but does have a 180 ISO that maybe gives him some hope of power to come. I guess we'll find out with that one. 12% barrel ball rate overall for old Chas McCormick in the 2-hole. But the Houston hitters, Terry, I feel like I like the side a lot more than Rodriguez's side. It is a weaker lineup, so I think that's something to keep in mind. And you do have some really not great guys at the bottom of the order: Taylor Jones, Miles Straw, guys really no pop. Straw does get some steals, but I don't have the highest faith in that being something you can reliably depend on in this spot. Maldonado, I think, is the one option I would go to, a catcher, 2,200. He is a lot better against lefty pitching as well, so that's something jumps out to me. But what priority bats are there for you in this Astros lineup, Terry?
Yeah, I mean, it would mostly be about the names that we know, the 3 righties that I rattled off the top before when I was talking about them with Altuve, Bregman, and Correa. Of course, that walks you right into the ownership. So Yeah, I think at the 2 spot, McCormick can definitely help you offset some of that. Aledmus Diaz wouldn't be out of play for me. 257, 318, 396. Not the greatest slash in the world, but it's okay. Creating runs 2% better than average on the season. Only 110 plate appearances. He's a guy with multi-position eligibility. $2,700 helps you offset a little bit of ownership. I would not love rostering Straw, but I think at 4.6% ownership, if I'm 10% Miles Straw, I'm okay with it because we're getting a far enough afield and we're saving a decent amount of money with a guy 311 on base percentage. You definitely want a much bigger on base percentage from a speed guy, but you do have that stolen base upside here. If he gets on base on a 3-game slate, I'm willing to make plays like that and throw more darts like that. And if he helps me pay for rostering the 3-star hitters above him, then I'm okay with it. It's not your greatest version of a wraparound play because of how infrequently he gets on base, because of how weak the hit tool is, but I'm willing to make the play on a 3-game slate. So I think he's in play, and I do agree with you on the Maldonado call. Great spot to get your catcher under 10% ownership on DK.
I would also say too, and we have Kyle Tucker projected for 18% ownership. I know you mentioned him being a solid play, but it is a spot where I wouldn't be surprised if that ownership's a little bit lower because of the lefty-lefty matchup. And it's one thing for both these guys where Tucker hits lefties much harder than you would think with a 5.2% home run rate against lefties. And Eduardo Rodriguez gives up more to lefties than you would think as well, a 4.8% home run rate against lefties compared to 2.4% against righties. So something to keep in mind here, that's actually not a bad lefty-lefty matchup. And I think Tucker is one way to maybe get that ownership down a little bit more than we're currently projecting. One more game here in the afternoon slate to hit on. So hit that like button if you can, guys. We appreciate it a bunch. We got Oakland, 4.4 implied runs against Logan Gilbert. Logan Gilbert, a pitcher even on a short slate who does not have a lot to offer. 22.4% K rate, giving up a 283 batting average on the year. Swinging strike rate, 9.4%. Not the best, maybe. Actually, no, it's probably about in line with where he should be given a strikeout rate. Chase rate for him, 32.8%, probably the best thing going for him, along with decent velocity with a 94.3 mile per hour fastball. And Gilbert's going to be 33% owned on the slate, Terry, and I feel like that is a risky spot going against an Oakland team that has a lot of bats. And Oakland, I thought, was a viable play on the main slate. That was really one of few under-owned teams. They'll be appropriately owned for this shorter slate, but I still think going against Gilbert, I would much rather have that side of the equation of taking the Oakland bats than Gilbert himself.
Yeah, I wrote up the A's stack for the main slate. It was one of my core focuses for the main slate. My highest owned stack, I believe, in my main slate entries, if not the highest, the second or third. So I was all over this team early. They're smashing through the power index that I create from my home run model. So getting a lot of home run upside from this team. Gilbert, I think, eventually might turn into an okay pitcher, but he's a fairly well-regarded prospect, but he's just not ready. It seems like he just needs more seasoning. You mentioned the fastball. It is a live fastball, but he's only inducing 9.4% swinging strikes. More concerningly, in the small sample, only getting 13% called strikes. That's pretty weak. So he's not really throwing enough strikes, not inducing enough strikeouts right now, and he's getting hit. He's getting hit pretty hard when guys are making contact. I'm looking for it. I just had it in front of me a second ago. It was a... how is it? 51.4% hard hit rate so far this season. That is not good. 8.6% barrel rate so far, 18 hard hit ball events. It's a lot. So I'd be concerned about, like I said, the power upside. Expected ERA of 5.32 is actually better than the actual ERA that he's got of 7.59 right now. But I think there's definitely something to be concerned about. I would not be rostering Logan Gilbert here to that degree. I might grab a few shares just to get the discount, but I don't, for one, really know what we can do with it on this short of slate. It's not like there's a litany of superstars to pay up for on this slate. So I don't really know why everybody's going to be going there. I would much, much rather be on the A's bats in this one.
Yeah, I think on the other side, obviously, very different price tag. And I get it is a very cheap Logan Gilbert play, so that may be part of why people are factoring in a little bit. But Caprelli on the other side, I think a much more appealing option, and even worth reconstructing your lineups to get there, because the fact that he's just actually good a pitcher. And Logan Gilbert, one thing that worries me too, he's throwing about 4.6 pitches per appearance, and like guy who's not getting strikeouts going against a team that only strikes out at about league average relative to 2021 standards. Like I don't think he's going to go that deep in the game to make it worthwhile. So a lot of bad things with Gilbert. 33% ownership, to me, is something to go against. And these Oakland bats on the other side will be decently owned as well. Guys like Mark Canha, Matt Olson, going to be very highly owned. It looks like both these guys in the neighborhood are 25%. The rest of the lineup, though, all under 20%, maybe most of these guys under 15%, it looks like. You're also not going to have to pay for Ramon Laureano, so that's a positive one, given that he's priced like Mike Trout for reasons inexplicable that Greg and I talked about earlier this morning. But this lineup overall, Terry, I feel like it's a pretty solid lineup. I actually had them as having more power than the team has had overall in the year against right-hand pitching. The lineup today is 213 ISO, 330 on base percentage. All this looks really good against Gilbert, and I think Oakland stack, to me, one that if you built a lot of what you did around them today, I wouldn't have any issue. And I think the prices also work because you're just missing some of those higher priced Ramon Laureanos of the world.
Yeah, I agree. I'd actually would not mind having high-priced Laureano in here because I think I would go to him, and a lot of people would be reluctant to go to him at those crazy Mike Trout prices. Ramon Laureano this season, 11 home runs, 8 stolen bases so far. Mike Trout, 8 home runs, 2 stolen bases so far. So maybe it is justified.
So it's all flipping around now. It's all Ramon Laureano's world.
So yeah, that was a crazy high price. I noted it when I had him in the projected lineup in my article that it was uncomfortable, but I feel like it would have kept people down. But I think the public is asleep at the switch on this A's lineup here. You mentioned the top 2 hitters, the names that people know are getting a ton of attention. I think the bloom is off of Jed Lowry a little bit in terms of his renaissance. It wasn't real ever. It was a nice start to the season. He's down to 246, 325, 385, hitting third. That's a little bit rough. But then you get Seth Brown, Sean Murphy, Mitch Moreland, a ton of power in that trio. None of those guys are getting enough ownership. And 2 lefty bats, and a couple extreme platoon guys. Seth Brown, I know, hasn't been in the major leagues. He's 28 years old. He's more of a quad A type player, but he's got multiple 30 home run seasons in the minors. Ton of power upside there, only under 15% owned. I think you can get to that. Everybody knows about Mitch Moreland in splits. He's an extreme splits guy. He has his home run power in this side of the platoon, so get to him. And then Matt Chapman, just sitting there, 11.6% projected ownership. He's struggling badly. 215 plate appearances. He's 208, 321, 348 with a 140 ISO, 5 home runs on the season. But this is Matt Chapman we're talking about. We've got enough track record with this guy. In 670 plate appearances in 2019, he had 36 home runs, had a 257 ISO, 249, 342, 506, created runs 25% better than average. That's Matt Chapman. That's who this guy is. So get to him. I would even roster Chad Pinder, get a nice little discount there, second base and outfield eligible on both sites. Dead minimum price on Fanduel. That leaves you like, I would rather get my discount there than go to Logan Gilbert as a discount price. Get your discount with some of these low owned A's hitters and throw them against Gilbert. Don't go the other way.
Yeah, and I think there are also some interesting constructions too, where like if you put Mitch Moreland in instead of Matt Olson, you're going to get about half the ownership, maybe even a little bit more than that, and same position as well. So if Moreland somehow has a day, like I think Olson's a strong play today, but Moreland also has pop for himself too and can get going against Logan Gilbert. Has been worse against lefties, at least in terms of getting even less strikeouts, giving up a higher batting average. To me, there's a lot of ways to get to the team, to stack them up, to be creative with it, and I think would just be heavily on them. And I think there's a high potential for these guys to have a home run. And also worth pointing out too, because of Oakland, we know they're obviously we've all seen Moneyball or Reddit. They do pay a lot of attention to analytics. It's also a really good launch angle team going against Gilbert. He gives up a really generous launch angle, 20.9 degrees, which is about right where you want to be for home runs or screaming line drives. A lot of ways for it to go badly for Gilbert and for it to go well for Oakland. So even if you don't play the Oakland bats, I think we're advocating pretty decently for that. Just be careful with your Logan Gilbert exposure because he is a guy that's going to be chalkier than he should be. But yeah, James,
absolutely. Sorry, I was just going to chime in on the creative constructions side of things. Just on the Fanduel slate real quick, you get Seth Brown as a first baseman only over there. So you actually have 3 first basemen over there. Wow. So if you want to mess around with playing Brown and Moreland together and leaving Olson out, you're leaving out their best hitter, their highest home run upside guy, but you're building it completely differently than a lot of people will be building with that lineup. Everybody's going to be including Olson in there. So like you were saying, there are some creative, easy ways to put this lineup together in unique ways. And you're not leaving that much on the table by going to Brown and Moreland with their home run upside. And Seth Brown was my home run pick today, since you got to get yours in.
Oh, there you go. That's a good choice. I think that's an interesting way to look at it too. And like Olson's a great play, but if you're playing multiple lineups, just trying to get different in that one spot that people who are stacking Oakland, it's very obvious to go to Olson, and there's still enough guys who have really good power that this is one team where you can't get different. You're not leaving a lot on the table. James Kaprielian on the other side, he's been very good on the year, relative to a guy who's new to the league, and he was somebody for the main slate at his price tag. I did not want to get there for the short slate at his price tag. I I think it's a lot more reasonable. 27% K rate for him facing a team on Seattle who does strike out at a 25.6% clip. And, 9,100, a steep price to pay for a guy who's only faced 70 batters this year, 87 batters since last year. But the numbers have been pretty good, Terry. I think worse things to come with the XFIP. Also, he's a guy with a really bad launch angle, 25.8 degree launch angle. It's going to give up some home runs at some point to come. But for me, it's hard to feel like that's going to come against a Seattle team that's had very little pop. And you go through this lineup, only one guy over a 200 ISO, and that's Kyle Seager. Everybody else is pretty beatable here. And I think that does blow me more towards Kaprelian for the short slate than it did for the main slate.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I was getting to some shares of him in the main slate as well. He was projecting pretty well this morning for Alex, one of the more sneaky high-end options on the main slate. He's a talented kid. He was a premium prospect for the Yankees, got sent out to Oakland in the Sonny Gray trade, if I remember correctly, then had some injury issues, but he's finally here. He seems like he's pitching fairly well. 4.81 xFIP is a little higher than you'd like to see, but 0.91 whip and a 27.1% strikeout rate over 17 2/3 in his first 3 starts. Pretty solid numbers going up against a Mariners lineup, like you said, kind of lacking in power. And they're also trailing the average in run creation, 14% below average in run creation, 38 home runs against righties this season with a 1.55 ISO. Those are both around the middle of the league, around average. 25.3% strikeout rate against righties, ranks them 10th worst in baseball. So it's an upside spot for him. There are some threats in the lineup. You mentioned Seager's power. That's an obvious hitter that we know has hit well for power against righties through his career. They've also got Jared Kelenic in the lineup now. He's a lefty leading off. He's struggled to get started, but he's a very high-end prospect. 2 home runs so far. So there's power. There's sneaky lefty power there. Kyle Lewis can get to a righty as well. Ty France. They're not terrible, but definitely on the back end of this lineup for sure. There's not much threat there, and there are some high strikeout rate guys back in, hiding in the back of that lineup with Jacob Nottingham back there. So I definitely think it could be a nice spot for Kaprelian to put up a little surprise start against people here.
Kaprelian throwing 96 pitches per appearance so far, which has been about resulted in just shy of 6 innings per appearance too. So I think a lot of things bode well for him here. You hope he doesn't get caught up chasing strikeouts a little too much against the lineup, because it is not a terribly high strikeout lineup, but there are some guys in the back of the order that should be able to make up for it. So I think Kaprelian a strong play for the afternoon slate, one I'd be willing to go to. But let's do a quick run of money time here. Let me make ssure that I got the ownership correct here, because I think we haven't gotten an update on it. So DK afternoon ownership, I'll flip the hat. Top 5 owned plays on DraftKings for the afternoon slate. Johnny Cueto, number 1 at 40%. James Kaprelian, number 2 at a slightly lower version of 40%. Number 3, Eduardo Rodriguez, 38%. Number 4, Dylan Bundy, 34%. And number 5, Logan Gilbert at 33%. And Terry, does it surprise you at all that it's all pitchers in the top 5 owned plays for DraftKings? Like there's bats that come afterwards. Bogarts, Olsen, not that far behind, but it just seems like a unique situation. I know it's a short slate, so that might just be the way that it has to go, but kind of crazy that Logan Gilbert's going to be the lowest owned of these guys. Amidst 5 guys are going to be higher owned than him.
Yeah, it's definitely not how my ownership distribution would look if I was going into this slate, which I am certainly not. That's a really strange little construction there. I mean, it makes sense that we would have a group of pitchers at the top, but having all 5 of them be pitchers, a little bit surprising we didn't have at least one hitter sneak in there, factoring in some one-off shares and everything, because not everybody's approaching this slate as full stacks by any means. So normally we see a lot of random scattered ownership to one-offs into high-end guys like you mentioned. Bogarts was pulling a lot of ownership. I think that makes sense. Or like a Matt Olson, you would think that would potentially rocket to a lot of ownership on this slate. So yeah, it's a weird little slate, weird configuration. It's a shame they don't have any good tournaments going for it.
And then a FanDuel late slate, I guess, is what we're filing this away as. But this is one that I think the ownership hasn't been updated to reflect the final Mariners lineup. So I'll just take out Mitch Haniger, who was projected to be the highest owned player on the slate. But Mike Yastrzemski would be number 1 now, 46% on FanDuel. Number 2, Matt Olson, 43.7%. Number 3, Mark Canha at 43%. Number 4, Johnny Cueto on FanDuel, 43%. And number 5, Brandon Crawford at 40%. And I guess, Terry, quick question with this Haniger ownership not being reflected in the lineup or in the current construction of ownership. With that, where do you think that ownership goes? Because I don't know who would obviously go to. I guess people could immediately swap to Kelenic, but Kelenic being a chalk play on FanDuel seems like it'd be an awful situation.
Yeah, I was stuck with a lot of Haniger shares in the main slate, and I pivoted some of it to Kelenic, but a lot of it just went to, I just started making full swaps off of this Mariners stack completely, where I had some Haniger shares pop up in stacks. I fortunately didn't have a lot of them as one-offs, so I think it would probably, in the situation where he's just a one-off, would probably just go to guys from other teams. And then if you're stuck with a stack where you've got to replace him in a four-man here, yeah, it just makes sense kind of to go to Kelnick. And then, like, I don't really want any part of Jake Fraley here. I assume Kyle Lewis is already in that stack. If he's not, then you can get to Kyle Lewis. It's just not a great situation if you're trying to build that. So.
Yep, I think that makes some sense. So let's talk about this night slate. Let me just paste in. We have one confirmed lineup from the night slate. So obviously there's some things that may move around here because we've got a few hours left until the night slate goes, but some decent tournaments on there. So make sure you are trying to play. If you are just hanging out for this one, or maybe you're, I don't know, just finishing up whatever you did for the daytime and want to get some action in, some decent night slate tournaments for MLB today. We have Pittsburgh going against Kansas City. And then wait, who is in this lineup that was not? Edward Olivares is in there, and I don't have him in my sheet, so let me just throw him in real fast. But Terry, we do have the Pittsburgh side here, 3.3 implied runs against Mike Minor. Mike Minor projected for over 50% ownership. Very good projection on him. Very shockingly cheap price tag. And the Royals don't strike out, the Pittsburgh doesn't strike out a ton, so maybe not a lot of strikeouts necessarily on paper there for Minor, but he's been throwing pretty well on the year. A 26.8% K rate is actually a pretty big jump for him as well. And I guess it's possible that he could take advantage against the Pittsburgh team that's just not that good. They just don't strike out a bunch. The 23.1% K rate on the year. But Mike Minor is chalk. You want to get there with the field, given that he projects really well and is just really cheap for a shorter slate.
Yeah, I think I am. And it's largely because of what you just mentioned with Pittsburgh. They just struggled to do anything other than not strike out to at least a respectable degree. And they're down to, against left-handed pitching, the active roster is down to 11th best in baseball. Normally they're a little higher than that. They're at 22.4% against lefties. But they're sitting at a 0.141 team ISO, creating runs 12% worse than average against lefties. Only 10 home runs in the split, is second worst, tied for second worst in baseball. So just not showing a ton of power upside, not showing a ton of run creation. It's at worst kind of a safe spot. Maybe he doesn't have extreme upside in terms of the strikeouts, Mike Minor right here, but I think, he's at 26.8%. So I think if he comes in right around where that number would leave him, 6-7 strikeouts, I could see that here. I don't think it's not like this lineup is so good in terms of not striking out. You get high numbers on guys like Gregory Polanco in the middle of the lineup. So there are strikeouts available here for him. I think Mike Minor could give us a nice start. And I think the way he's priced, it makes sense that he's drawing all that ownership, given a lot of people aren't going to want to go to Merrill Kelly or Chad Kuhl, which I can totally understand. And a lot of people are going to want to go to the three aces that are available on this slate. So you got to figure out a good way to pay for it. And I think Mike Minor kind of helps you do that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think he's going to fit a lot of constructions at work. I have no issue with him. On Draftkings, a 50% ownership, certainly a bit onerous, but it's a short enough slate that I think if you're with the field on 50%, I would try to cap it there if you can. But to me, that seems like a good number to get to. Pittsburgh, 3.3 implied runs for them, as we mentioned, but the hitting here going to be decently owned. Kevin Newman, Brian Reynolds, guys project for a good amount of ownership in this spot. Cheap price tags for the whole team, and maybe there is some way for them to get there. And I think Pittsburgh, too, going to open up whatever you want at pitching. So that's probably one of the ways that people will pay for some of the studs on the slate at pitcher today. But Pittsburgh, Terry, just a team that I don't know that I see a ton of potential for here. I guess some of the guys here hit a little better. Jacob Stallings has been pretty good against lefty. It's a 261 ISO for him. We have Kai Tom at the bottom of the order, who's also got a 230 ISO against left-hand pitching, but not the biggest sample size for him. Like, I don't mind getting to them on paper, and I think it's particularly the lower owned guys, but chalky Kevin Frazier or Adam Frazier, chalky Kevin Newman, chalky Brian Reynolds. Reynolds I like, but not at 25%. And Newman I don't like, and I definitely don't like him at over 20%.
Yeah, the nicest thing to say about these guys, I think, is other than the fact that they don't strike out too much, is that they're all cheap on both sites. They're very inexpensive, so they can help you do things if you want to put them together. But you're talking about throwing them at a pretty good pitcher, a pretty good lefty, where, like I just went through, they do not create runs against lefties. They do not hit for power against lefties. What are we chasing there in terms of DFS upside if we're doing it? So yeah, and if they're getting ownership, like, it's just a stay away spot for me. I know it's a short slate, but I can be pickier than that. I don't think we need to really dig into this one. I would almost rather throw lower owned bats at some of the aces, take the contrarian angle there, pay up for some lower owned bats from some of those teams, and then just take my pitching in with Mike Minor here against a really weak Pittsburgh lineup. If I was to do it, Reynolds is my favorite hitter in this lineup. I do think he's a very good hitter. Hits from both sides of the plate. 287, 389, 478, very respectable. 191 ISO, 6 home runs so far this season, creating runs 42% better than average. That's your hitter here if you're going to anybody in this lineup. Kai Tom down the bottom, struggling to create runs, 25% worse than average. But yeah, the ISO is there. Same with Stallings, is the ISO is there, and he's creating runs. But if people are going to be on him, it's just uncomfortable for me, even at only 2,100 on FanDuel. Just a little bit uncomfortable. 46 on DK, you're paying up, you're getting him at catcher. I can understand it, but if people are going to be there, I'd just rather be somewhere else because there's no real upside for other guys to be on. So even if he does hit a home run for us, it's not going to be a 3-run homer. You're just getting the one, and I don't know, it's dicey at best.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. And Kai Tom on DraftKings is minimum salary, so I getting him a little bit as a one-off lefty-lefty matchup. So the fact that he's starting at all probably does mean there's some safety to his at bats as well. But I think in the spot, that to me is just one thing that jumps out. It's a cheap stack. People will be there though, so watch the ownership for that one. I think in particular because maybe you could get some of the cheaper, lower-owned guys, but not a lot of potential against Mike Minor. The other side, speaking of not a lot of potential, Chad Kuhl, who has been very bad on the year, throwing 80 pitches per appearance, but giving up a 6.6 xFIP. He's actually been, I don't know if he's been lucky with the batting average. He's been a 209 batting average allowed guy since 2019, I guess since last season. But also getting lucky with the BABIP, but that might just be part of his game style because he's not getting strikeouts. 18.4% strikeout rate, a 5% on run rate. It seems to me like there should be really bad days, but the low BABIP, low batting average are there for him. So maybe he's just getting lucky. Maybe it's just part of his approach that's working out for him. But it does seem like Chad Kuhl, one pitcher on even on a short slate, Terry, I don't know how you get there at all. He's only getting him through about 4 innings per appearance, less than that. And I don't think there's a lot of strikeouts here. And he's certainly not the guy to get him, even if there were. So Chad Kuhl, I think would be one pitcher I wouldn't mind just ruling out.
Yeah, I would have no issues with that. I've got enough respect for the Royals lineup on the other side just to throw another log on that fire. So yeah, I have no real use for Chad Kuhl here. I don't really even have a good way to justify the play. 6.64 xFIP, 1.79 whip so far this season, walking 21.1% of hitters. It's a 15 and 2/3 inning sample, so presumably that'll come down. I don't think the strikeouts are going to go up much from the 18.4% he's at. Maybe he lands in the low 20s, but it's not going to be a massive improvement. This is who this guy is. I am totally fine skipping him, and I would definitely be interested in some Royals bats going the other way, pending what the ownership looks like. I'm not getting the ownership populated in my sheet here.
Yeah, so the ownership on DraftKings looks real tough. You're going to have a bunch of guys over 20%. In fact, quite a few guys over 25%, a few over 30%, and then one or two more over 35% as well. Andrew Benintendi being one of those guys who now projects for over 30% ownership or over 35% ownership on the slate, just shy of 40%, in fact, for him. So that, to me, gives me some concern, even on a short slate, that this is a lot of ownership going to these guys. I think you have to get some exposure because this is one of the higher implied totals amidst all the games we're talking about. Definitely one of the higher implied totals on the night slate as well, 4.7 runs. But this is so much ownership to a Royals team that I think I know you said you have some respect for them, but on the year, just a 146 ISO against right-hand pitching. It's a decent Pittsburgh bullpen behind them. I think better than the starters will be, definitely than the starter today with Chad Kuhl. I don't know how you handle the Royals, Terry, but I know I don't want to play a 50% owned Adalberto Mondesi, no matter how good he is at, sort of the peripheral things and adding up a decent day with some stolen bases and all that.
Yeah, that is some challenging ownership for sure. I'm just finally getting it to drop into my spreadsheet here. I had to do a little cosmetic surgery real quick. But yeah, if you're getting that kind of heavy ownership and it looks like Kelvin Gutierrez is your one relief valve in the lineup, Michael Taylor's not popping up because there's an A in his name in some spots and not others, and I don't have a fix for that built in here. So I don't have his ownership in front of me. But yeah, it's just too tough to weave these guys together. Maybe, I don't even want to say if you're grabbing one-offs because they're too really highly owned for that. It's a tricky spot. Yeah, it's a 3-game slate. So if you're rostering, maybe taking 3-man stacks out of this, maybe grabbing 2-man stacks out of this and putting together just unique combinations of the ways that you're even building lineups. Maybe you're grabbing like a 3-3-2 on FanDuel and you can grab your 2-man out of here and just put it together in different ways across the full lineup, because it's not going to be very viable to put this specific stack together in unique enough ways where you're going to be differentiated from the field with everybody approaching or above 30% ownership. And Alberto at 50. That's just insane.
Yeah, it's very lofty ownership here. Watch the night slate ownership if you are an Awesemo Plus member, because maybe it comes down a little bit and makes it a slightly more tolerable. But I think just because Chad Kuhl's been so bad, people want to target it. And, I think to me, this would be one way. Yeah. One way to get different on the slate. Next game up, we got the Cardinals 2.9 implied runs against Trevor Bauer. Trevor Bauer going to be one of the chalkiest plays, if not the chalkiest play on the night slate, with 65% projected ownership on Draftkings. Bauer, we know the numbers on the year. He's been really good, though not quite as good maybe as some of the other star pitchers we talk about regularly. 34% K rate for him on the year is actually down a little bit from his sample size since last year, where he's at a 25% K rate over the last season and change, but still looks pretty good. It is a St. Louis lineup that doesn't strike out a lot, though, at 22.9% K rate for them, which is the old league average, but it's under the new league average, 24.1% for this season. But overall, St. Louis, I think, competent enough to maybe hurt Bauer's upside a little bit. They don't have a ton of power in their lineup against right-hand pitching, but it does give me some concern here for Bauer that I think on a short slate, I don't know, I still might be, for me, inclined to take a lower owned Degrom, I think is my more appealing option, but I'm not going to, it's hard to sort of nickel and dime Trevor Bauer in a short slate, Terry. So I think he's fine. I think he looks a little bit over-owned to be the main way that I would look at it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And you're paying up to, the ace level pitcher that he is. So it's not like you're getting any kind of discount on salary, really. 10.5 on DK, priced up further than that, 11.8 on the Fanduel slate. I think I agree with you. I probably would land on more shares of Degrom if the ownership splits that way, even though you're paying more to do it. I think that's probably why the ownership splits that way, is because of the increased price. But we already talked about having some value bats available on this slate. And if you're making the specific decision to go away from Bauer and go to Degrom shares, that opens up a bunch of low-owned Cardinals bats at reasonable prices. So yeah, they're in a tough spot, but these are capable hitters. At least 1 through 5 are capable professional hitters. Then you get some power with some extreme strikeout upside, downside in Tyler O'Neill if he's in the lineup. And some low-owned, low-cost guys in Edmundo Sosa and Justin Williams at the bottom of the lineup. But for me, if we're getting to Tommy Edman, Dylan Carlson, Goldschmidt, Arenado, and Yadi Molina, all under 10% owned, even throwing him up against a tough pitcher like this, if he's going to be drawing a lot of ownership, I would be comfortable getting to some shares of that. And on a 3-game slate, if you're putting in a full slate of lineups, you're going to have to get different with it. So that would be one spot where you could do it. If you're going to Degrom over Bauer, I would do the same thing going the other way. If you're making the other decision, I would maybe consider some Arizona bats. I don't like them nearly as much as I like the Cardinals. So that's another reason I'd be more inclined to skip Bauer, go to Degrom, because you're getting just a better lineup going up against the ace that you're choosing to draw against by doing that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And yeah, there are certainly some guys here. Arenado has been competent enough against righties to get there. Paul Goldschmidt, same thing. You are paying a pretty premium price tag for these guys given the fact they are going against Trevor Bauer, who's still a very good army, if he's not quite as good as Degrom relative to the fantasy results we're looking for. But yeah, you definitely can get these guys at low ownership, which is hard to say on any sort of night slate. These guys all project for under 10% besides Jack Flaherty, who is the pitcher that we'll talk about now. Jack Flaherty projects for just shy of 20% ownership. He's been down in terms of his strikeouts on the year. I think there's maybe some cause for concern. The swing strike rate's down a little bit. Velocity's down a little bit. The chase rate is also down a good amount here, so he's not getting guys to come off the plate. Max exit velocity also looking pretty bad at 113 miles per hour, so that's one of the higher marks on the entire slate of games that we're talking about here, and is pretty close to Merrill Kelly territory, so keep that in mind for a frame of reference here. But Flaherty, I think, relative to a short slate, I don't mind getting there a little bit, I guess, just because of the fact he'll be less owned than a guy like Bauer, and I think that's sort of a price point pivot that you could maybe save a little money, get a chance at similar upside, though. Again, Flaherty's just not quite as good. So I'm kind of trying to make the case here, Terry, but it's not the strongest one. How are you landing about Flaherty? And talk to me about the Dodgers bats as well.
Yeah, I want Flaherty to be there, but I'm concerned as well. The strikeout rate being down, the velo being down, all the indicators that you mentioned there, and it's a big enough dip in the strikeout rate and the swinging strike rate that it's drawing the eye at least. So I do get concerned about it. I think there's, certainly evidence that he's a very capable pitcher, certainly things to believe in the turnaround. I just get concerned that, you get into those thoughts about a pitcher maybe pitching through pain, hiding an injury, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe it's just something mechanical that he works out, but I do get concerned about it, particularly when we're paying 10-1 on FanDuel going up against a very good Dodgers lineup. Got Cody Bellinger back in the lineup. He should be in the lineup today. One of the best lefty bats in baseball. That could cause all kinds of problems for Flaherty. At 9,000 on DK, he's at a much friendlier price. I think he works a little bit better over there in terms of, I mentioned how minor helps make things work. I think you can get to spots where you're rostering Flaherty and Degrom and still getting to decent bats and decent ownership shares. So there are paths toward using him more on the DK slate. I'd just be concerned when he's my singular pitcher going up against a good lineup. There is upside for him. He could have a nice start here, but it's less likely than the other aces for sure. Still, capable at 24.5% strikeout rate, 4.04 xFIP, 1.07. It's not like he's been tragic. It's not like he's in the mid fives with his xFIP or he's letting too many guys on base. He's been okay, but we expect more than just okay out of Jack Flaherty, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I would agree. They get his price tag. It works for tournaments, but don't be surprised if he just has kind of a mediocre day because that's basically what he's been doing all year long. Dodgers bats certainly can get to him here, though they look also appropriately owned, as is going to be the case on most of these slates when a pitcher has any sign of weakness. And I don't mind going to the Dodgers here. I think the lineup's certainly looking a little bit stronger if they are going to have Cody Bellinger and Will Smith in there alongside Muncy and Betts. That is pretty much a fully stocked Dodgers lineup that we haven't seen a lot of in recent weeks. But I think that to me is the way that it works. If you get a weaker version of this lineup, I think I would have less interest, Terry. But how are you feeling about the Dodgers hitters? And I guess, are you willing to be with the field on roughly 20% ownership for most of the star players?
Yeah, I think at 20%, we're all right. It's not those crazy high numbers we were talking about with who was that, Oakland in the other slate, I think, that was just getting rocketing through the roof. So I think that's comfortable enough. And then you can offset some of the higher owned guys by rostering like a Justin Turner at only 12% ownership. I think that's fine. Mookie's not at even 20%. So there are ways to put this together uniquely. And then even if you're going down to guys like Gavin Lux and Chris Taylor at the bottom of the lineup, I don't really have any problem including those guys. Taylor especially, 269, 394, 450 this year with a 181 ISO, 6 homers, 6 stolen bases in 193 plate appearances. That's fine to roster for 4,300 at no ownership to help with this stack. So I like the Dodgers there, particularly if you're not rostering Flaherty or you're undercutting the field and thinking that he doesn't have a great start. That's a fine roster to go to, and definitely one that you can put together in good ways. I wouldn't even completely sleep on Albert Pujols, to be quite honest. He's shown a little bit of the pop is back since he's been on the other side of Los Angeles, I guess I should say. He's got 8 home runs on the season, still kind of a clunky triple slash at 210, 258, but the ISO's up to 210. WRC plus is up to 87, which is 13% below average, but he's increasing it. So there's something to be said for rostering some shares of Albert there.
All right, let's get to our last game on the night slate. We got the Mets getting 4.2 implied runs against Merrill Kelly. Merrill Kelly going to be decently owned for who Merrill Kelly is, over 20% ownership expected his way for the Draftkings night slate. Kelly, a 21% strikeout guy on the year who's been getting hit really hard. Also, the swinging strike rate for him is down from 9.6% to 8.7% compared to his 2019 sample size. So that's another worrying sign for Kelly overall. And the Mets team getting a little bit healthier. Pete Alonso expected to be in the lineup. I think certainly one part that helps here, Dominic Smith, Lindor. Lindor also, hitting a little bit better against righties historically. I think gives some hope this could be one spot that he gets better. And I don't like Merrill Kelly very much, Terry. I feel like because of the price tag, I see how people might get there. I wouldn't completely rule him out like we talked about some of the other guys earlier in the slate, Chad Kuhl in particular. But I do think Merrill Kelly to me a little bit overowned again, and I would rather find another way to make this work. I'd rather take the Mets bats against them. So give me your thoughts on Kelly, and I guess do you have any interest at all there?
I don't think so. He's cheap, and if you're looking to roster extremely expensive bats in some sort of configuration where you're not necessarily going a full team stack, so you're just grabbing expensive guys and kind of using some of these guys that are owned in the teams that we've talked about from the different teams and throwing them together, and you need a cheap pitcher and none of those guys are Mets, I guess it's somewhat justifiable just in terms of he's better than Chad Kuhl and out of the 2 cheap guys, but I would just so much rather try and figure out a way to get up to Mike Minor's salary and just use him and not worry about the ownership there. Not a good pitcher in not a good spot. You mentioned the improvements in the Mets lineup. Yeah, it's not what was that? Maybe a double A lineup that the Mets have been rolling out lately. So you've got a fairly hot Jonathan VR up at the top of it, probably. Francisco Lindor now 2 hits shy of earning $1 million per hit so far this season. He's got 31 hits. He's making $33 million. He'll get there. He's Francisco Lindor. I remain unconcerned. he will eventually turn back into Francisco Lindor. It could easily start tonight against Merrill Kelly, Dom Smith, Pete Alonso, James McCann. Nice pop through the middle there. And then it's almost a complete write-off at the bottom with Kevin Pillar, Jose Peraza, and Cam Maben. But if you want to mix and match some shares of those guys, particularly Pillar, assuming he's in the lineup, would be my preference there.
Yeah, Pete Alonso to me looks a little bit under-owned relative to the rest of the stack, where you do have over 30% ownership expected for Dominic Smith and for Jonathan Villar. Really, the main three-man stack, it looks like, will be Villar, Smith, plus McCann. So keep that in mind if you're playing the Mets today, that going to the five-man gets the ownership down a little bit. But I do think Pete Alonso, to me, just a little bit underappreciated, maybe because of the price tag and the positionality. But I would have him as having one of the highest probabilities to hit a home run today, going against Merrill Kelly. He gives up 4.5% home run rate and a 205 ISO to righties. I think he's a very strong play who could, I won't say a slate breaker, but he certainly has the potential to do that. On the other side, we have Jacob Degrom, who's got his 47% K rate on the year, 0.6 whip, 1.6 xFIP, just really gaudy numbers in terms of pitcher performance. Does get barreled a little bit more than you would like to see, but a 21.2% swing strike rate, 42% chase rate, really strong numbers. Going against an Arizona team that doesn't strike out a ton, under league average technically with their 23.9% K rate against right-hand pitching on the year. But it's Degrom. He's pitching for the most part about 86 pitches per start, and that's probably a number that's a little bit lower than it should be because of him coming back recently. But I think Degrom on this slate, Terry, like, it's not a great matchup on paper. It's not one where you expect him to necessarily get 15 strikeouts, something like that, like it might be against a Detroit or somebody similar. But still, it's Arizona, and I'm not terrified of them at all. And I think Degrom stuff is the best on the slate. So to me, he's a guy that 40% owned when you have guys like Bauer projected for 60% ownership. I would flip those numbers in a heartbeat.
Look at you finding two different ways to nitpick Jake DeGrom going in and then still choosing to want to roster him at the end of the of the windup. I like.
You got to make the case for both sides. It's a world of infinite possibilities, Terry. We know that in MLB DFS.
For sure. And this is a spot, like you said, it's not the worst roster in the world going up against them. They're decent against righties. They're around the middle of the league in most of the things we care about. So yeah, it's not a incredible upside spot, but it is an incredible upside pitcher. So yeah, best stuff in the league, I think, overall for Jake DeGrom. 46.5% strikeout rate on the season, 1.56 xFIP, 0.60 whip, 4.4% walk rate over his 7 starts. You'd like to see more depth. You'd like to see less hard contact, but yeah, we're talking about Jake DeGrom here. Fire away. Absolutely the best option. Pay up. It's fine, especially if you're offsetting some of that ownership, getting away from the heavier owned Bauer. We talked about how to do that. I really like the idea of doing it there. I think 15 strikeouts could even be reasonable against this lineup, to be quite honest, since it's Jake DeGrom. I wouldn't say that about anybody else, but Jake DeGrom wouldn't totally shock me if he did that. I don't expect it, but it wouldn't totally shock me if he went out and had that start. So I think he's clearly the biggest upside play on the slate. Absolutely can get there. And Pete Alonso, by the way, is leading my home run model for the entire slate for this late slate. So good call by you.
They're good. Great minds think alike. Yeah. DeGrom, one thing for me too, is that he's just more efficient with his work too, where, Bauer is going to get his strikeouts, but he's throwing 4.3 pitches per plate appearance, whereas DeGrom's throwing 3.8. He just makes it work a lot more easily. And I think Arizona doesn't strike out a lot. They're striking out at league average roughly. I guess, the mediocre pitchers they're facing, they are not facing Jacob DeGrom that often. I do think that all leads me like this matchup feels safe in addition to having the upside you'd want to have. So to me, DeGrom should be your night slate pitcher. Terry, you want to do a home run here for whatever? I know you mentioned Seth Brown earlier, but if you want to take anybody on the night slate or the main slate, let's do it now.
Yeah. Let me look for one. Do you have one in mind?
I got to stick with Pete Alonso. I mean, now that I know he's on top of your board too. And I do like the narrative of him being a little bit lower owned than the Mets. He's the guy that I think not only one home run today, only one home run today, Terry, 2 home runs from Pete Alonso. I'll go that deep with it.
Wow. Calling the double dong. I love it. All right. Let me get in here. I'm gonna go to those Kansas City Royals against Chad Kuhl. Take maybe kind of an easy spot. Actually, no, he's too highly owned. I was gonna go Carlos Santana. He's got a nice home run mark, but he's too highly owned. Instead, I'm gonna go completely the other way. I'm gonna draw it against Trevor Bauer. I'm gonna do it with probably one of the worst guys to do it with, and I'm gonna take Tyler O'Neill. He's got the best home run mark on the cards, but he's also most likely to strike out 4 times for me. Tyler O'Neill.
That's the volatility you want in tournaments anyway.
Exactly.
So we always say. All right, make sure to go follow at DigitalB21. That's Terry, so you can see all the content he's doing, all of his thoughts as well. Follow me at Chris Spags too. Follow at Awesemo_com to see all the content that we have going on, which, as you can tell by this day, it never stops around here. So make sure you are getting all of that into your life. So let's check out some of the flash giveaways, stuff we don't have even a chance to promote on the shows. That all comes through the at Awesemo_com Twitter handle. We appreciate you guys for being here again. Happy Memorial Day to all of you guys out there. Make sure to take some time to do so. some remembrance of the things you're supposed to on this day. And we hope you guys enjoy the rest of your days. And shout out to our producer, Tyler, as well, making it all work for us here. We'll see you guys again soon. Enjoy your days. Good luck.